Okay, so here we are with the cover of the book, Secrets of Your Cells. It came out in 2013 and has been published in 7 other languages besides English. So it's been exciting to me, as this is one of my babies, really, that this book is having a global impact. And like I was saying to Sue earlier, I hadn't reread the book for years, but now I am rereading it and enjoying it. So let's go to the next slide. And hello, Lisa. So where's the title Secrets of Your Cells come from? And how can there be secrets in our cells? Actually, the name of the work I was doing before Sounds True contacted me to see if I had a book was Cells and the Sacred, because I am bridging science along with spirituality, along with practical information. But it's like, how did I get to the place of seeing secrets in your cells as a hardcore scientist? So my vision began expanding when I started using the microscope. I'm trained as a biochemist, and I took postdoctoral training in immunology and hematology. And when I was taking this postdoctoral fellowship, I needed to go beyond chemicals to cells, which forced me to use a microscope, which was a real blessing. And so a lot of how I teach is through the photographs that I take through the microscope. This is actually the original camera system I used. It's on the third eye of the microscope, and it really changed how I understood life, or how I was exploring life, because as a biochemist, you can define everything in your system. In your test tube, you can define every variable, and you still don't get everything reacting 100%. But when you're working with people or you're working with cells, you're working with a much more complicated dimension. And so it opened my consciousness to things being more than what's measurable. And fortunately, the first cell, I only worked on human cells, and the first cell I began studying was a human white blood cell. And right off, at the beginning, when I would see this living cell through the microscope moving towards this particle, I was struck with 2 things. I was struck with how smart this cell is, that it knows that there's something foreign in its environment and can go after it. And it was a big aha moment for me in terms of, oh, well, if these invisible creatures are so smart, they have to be designed by the divine designer. There has to be a spiritual origin in them. At least that's how I felt my consciousness was opening up to. We're more than our biology. And the work evolved from first understanding normal human white blood cells to then studying human leukemia cells, which is a cancer of the white blood cells. And here again was one of those aha moments that was taking me out of the scientific way of thinking, which was only what's measurable is real. And what I learned from looking at normal cells are very regular in their appearance. And as I began studying leukemia cells, I saw that everyone is different. They're not following the same rules of development. And my work, funded by the National Cancer Institute and the American Cancer Society, was to be able to develop objective criteria for understanding what kind of leukemia this is, how do we treat it, etc. That's a whole other story. But the microscope opened my eyes to a lot. And this is one of my big teachers, Alvaro. Because the leukemias I was studying were mostly in children with with children's leukemia, I began spending a lot of time with the kids, and they wanted to see their cells. They wanted to see normal cells. They wanted to see what cells were making them sick. So I began doing slideshows down in pediatric oncology at the clinic every week. And a fluke, an accident, if you will, which I talk about in the book, I went to the Science Museum and saw chemicals of the brain through the same kind of microscope I was photographing cells with. And so I began photographing, one, because I didn't think chemicals had any intrinsic beauty. I began photographing chemicals through the microscope and sharing that with kids. And always my teaching includes the photographs through the microscope because it makes it real. Cells don't have a reality for most of us. They're invisible. They're trillions, that's numbers that maybe don't have a reality with us. So how do we make them tangible and real? And then how do we make the molecules even so real? So in developing the course or in developing the book, let me get a drink of water. It came from that first question, how smart this cell was. How smart? How does it know? And then I began developing, after the book came out, courses called Awakening Your Cellular Intelligence or Activating Your Cellular Intelligence. What is that? And cellular intelligence puts together a lot of the chapters in the book. It looks at what a cell has to do to survive. And each cell does about 1 million different activities within a minute. So it has an incredible capability, and cells need to be able to recognize is a big one, recognize what's friend or foe, recognize danger and deal with it. In this case, if this was a bacteria, this cell would recognize that as foreign and be able to take it in and kill it. Cells are able to recognize information. They're able to translate that information into some kind of action. They need to be able to handle the problems that come to them in their environment. They need to be able to communicate the information that they've received to other cells. So there's a whole community of cells. They don't operate by themselves. They need to solve problems, and they solve it in collaboration with other cells. They're doing it together. They're not competing. And they need to also be able to not only produce energy from their food, they need to be able to know what's safe to eat at a cellular level and when to be able to replenish themselves. And all of this we go into detail in the book and in the course. They need to move. You'll see in a few moments that they vibrate. They need to reproduce, recycle, repair, rest. It's all the things that we as humans need to do. I mean, that was one of the things I learned as I was writing the book. It's like everything a cell does, we need to do, or everything we do, the cell does. And are there lessons for us to be able to take advantage and translate into our everyday life? So the book starts actually with my story, the backstory of how did I get here? What did I do to get to this place? And then we start into the anatomy or the architecture of life. And it starts, the first chapter is basically, it's not, I don't call it in the beginning. The first chapter is, well, how did that first cell get here? We have myths that come from science. We have the Big Bang theory. We have myths that come from different religions. They're all stories. And we look at, in the first chapter, what's the story I came up with by integrating what I know from science and beyond that. And one key thing that came from actually an astrobiologist, David Deamer, who said, what's really important is that life needs a place. Until we had a place, a container, life couldn't happen. It was just free floating molecules that came from the stars. Did they land in muddy waters? Did they land in the hot streams? We still don't really understand that. So life needs a place, molecules need the place to gather and come together. And what I've done is translated the words in many ways into more sacred understandings, just because that's who I am. That's who I evolved to from being a scientist. And then so our cells are sanctuaries. And it's a sanctuary for everything that needs to take place for us to live. And it's also a sanctuary, if we think about it, for the divine spark, wherever that comes from. It needs a place to enter into a cell. And, scientists have tried mixing together all the chemicals that we need for creating the container for life. They don't get anything like alive, even with all the molecules. So we know there's something greater. And so the first chapter really goes much more into some of the creation and the ideas that in the beginning was the sound. So we look at how sound influences form and formation and what it does at a cellular level. And then we go into, like, to make it practical, rather than it just simply being a science course, it's, well, what information are our cells responding to? What information are the cells in my body listening to? Since the cells have to recognize information. And a perfect example to look at what happens in your own body is if you're tense and stressed and make a fist, just feel making a fist. When you're tense and stressed, that's changing what your cells are able to do. And throughout the course, you learn what's going on at a cellular level. I'm trying to make this overview as simple as possible so that it encourages you to want to explore your cells. And so part of that information, part of that tension, you may not be making a fist, but as we begin to understand our body and learn about our bodies, we begin to understand that if I'm holding worry, or fear, or anger, that's got a chemical signature. It's got molecular responses that get recognized by the cells. And in these experiences, if we pay attention to our body, we may recognize, when I'm worried, my shoulders are up to my ears or my jaw is clenched. We begin to really get a deeper picture of our own body, what's going on with this. This is the mind and emotion sending out these feelings that the cell now is able to recognize. And as I said, we start with looking at the anatomy of the cell, the architecture of life. So we'll start with the simplest part of the cell, the outside of the cell, the part of the cell that is able to recognize information, recognize molecules of emotion. And we'll see, for me, it was really interesting to see the difference. The receiving sites on the outside of the cell are called receptors, or like antenna, and they're different shapes. And the different shapes are able to recognize different kinds of information. So when we're stressed, one of the first molecules we make, or when we're worried or anxious, is adrenaline. This is the shape of adrenaline. Through the microscope, it lands on receptor sites. Only receptor sites that can recognize adrenaline can hold on to it. It's like a hand. And this is another example of, this is histamine. So histamine is made when we've got an inflammatory response going on. That will need a very different kind of receptor site, as you can see from the shape of the molecules. So a lot of the story and how our cells work is based on recognizing patterns, recognizing shapes of molecules. It sounds pretty simple. A lot of our drugs these days are built to mimic these kinds of molecules. People with heart disease, high blood pressure, often are given beta blockers, and beta blockers will look similar to adrenaline. It blocks the receptor, the beta receptor for adrenaline, so blood pressure doesn't go up. Beating of the cells slows down. So this is one phenomenon of recognition. And it's not enough. I mean, it's incredible when you really get into, I fell in love with the cells much more after I wrote the book. It's like, whoa, I took for granted a lot of how they worked until I started writing about it and now teaching about it. So we've got these receptors on the outsides of the cell, on the cell membrane. They're the receivers. But then we have inside the cell, in my own interpretation, this is the most important part of the cell, because getting the information is like the radio. Getting the information is not enough. You need to turn the dial. You need to do something. There needs to be an action. So inside the cell is something called the cytoskeleton, and it's made up of tubes, microtubules, struts, and strings. And this is the responder, or the decision maker, or the one that makes the choice about how the cells handle that information. And you'll learn a lot about the cytoskeleton. Obviously, I think it's the chapter 4 on the fabric of life. And what's key about the cytoskeleton is it not just only responds to tension and information like this, it influences the expression of our genes. So we see that these got a lot of different functions. These two qualities are anatomical features of our cells. And I like to build, the way the book is written, it's building the book from the outside in, so that you begin to understand, oh, okay, now we've got the surface that's got receiving sites. It's also got identity markers. Then we get into, what's the third one? Probably the fabric, choosing the fabric. I've got a list at the end. So one of the key things is your cells are always listening. They're listening to everything you're thinking, saying, feeling. And you begin to, part of the class is really, how do we become aware of what's going on here? And can I change the message? Yeah, you can. It's like Sue was saying about meditating. We're changing the message. We don't always have to be in anger. We can shift that. And we shift it at a molecular level, and we shift it at a cellular level. And what we're learning about the power of the cytoskeleton, that it's a mechanical responder. It responds faster than our molecules, within microseconds, much faster than our molecules. So just changing a posture can influence the health of our cells. So I always like to ask, well, what message do you want to send to your cells? Are you sending, I'm always worried, I'm unhappy? And why not change that? Can you change that? So this is an example of, again, the outside of the cell and all these receptor sites. And I like to say, well, can we send the idea of gratitude? And I'll talk about that in probably chapter 7. Talk about the power of gratitude. And in the course, there's an audio that I've used for many years in taking people into an experiential, which we will have experiential in the course, because although this might be written about in the book, I actually take you through the experience, which is different. It's different doing it live than trying to read it. Key to my understanding and my appreciation of the cell anatomy is our cells are strings. And until I really recognized this, I didn't learn about this part of the cell until almost 20 years ago. So I knew nothing about this when I was studying biology. And what do we know about strings? Strings vibrate, strings change shape. And those of us who have been open to complementary healing practices like energy, like chanting, like hands-on healing, we've always been told that that's woo-woo, it's not real stuff. You're just talking about the mystical. But in fact, we now have, what made me really excited, we actually have a structure in our cells that responds to sound and music, which to me is really exciting. It's not just our brain that can respond, it's every cell. And one of the exercises I teach early on is the hum, and I'll show you why I do that, which is an easy practice for 5 minutes to hum and lower your stress level. It's one of the most popular practices from students I see. So we've got these vibrating strings. And what's even more interesting, if you think on these terms, besides energy influencing our cells, sound influencing our cells, some scientists believe that the cytoskeleton, the microtubules in the cytoskeleton, which are the biggest structures, that they're really the ones that hold consciousness. And we have information from ancient traditions that show that different postures change consciousness. In yoga, we've got the different mudras influence a state of mind or receptivity, and we begin to see other ways that we can tap into the body that's not just changing our mood, but is it changing consciousness, which is the energy of our thoughts, or of our field, if you will. And that changes our genes. Although I talk a little bit about epigenetics and the factors that change the gene expression in the book, I will probably talk more about it in the class, because, you know, like everything, you learn more after you write a book. So we'll see what influences the expression of our genes, as I will also talk about neuroplasticity, what changes our brain, the things that change our brain and how to learn. So the humming. In the book, I write about humming as really being important for enhancing the sense of self. Years ago, I used to run a group for women with chronic fatigue syndrome. And chronic fatigue is an illness where, one, they were discounted. Nobody believed that there was such an illness, but they lost their memory, basically. They lost a sense of self. And I had read about a psychologist who used humming to improve the sense of self to his clients. And so I began, and it's written about in the book, using humming, just taking a deep breath in, and on the exhale, and we do that for about 5 minutes. And that improved their sense of self and improved their energy. And of course, we were doing it for a year, so you got to have more than just humming. We had the group support for over a year. But then, was it last year, 2 years ago, Jonathan Goldman, who's a sound healer, came out with the physiologic measurements of what happens during humming. And so, which is not in the book, looking at, in fact, doing humming or om reduces the stress hormones. It reduces blood pressure. It increases nitric oxide, which enhances or expands the blood vessels. It increases endorphins, which decrease our experience of pain. It increases the oxygen in the cells, so their cells are able to make more energy. And you'll learn all about how this works at a cellular level. So humming, if nothing else, remember to go home and hum for 5 minutes. That you've got a new technique to try for balancing your mind and body. Oh, and lymphatic circulation, I forgot that. That's improving the filtration system of the through the immune system. So I wrote up this sheet way back when, and I think it's the last page of the cell book. What are the lessons from our cells? As you see, I've translated it into something bigger than biology. The lessons are about embracing life. And in the book, you'll see I ask reflection questions like, how do you embrace life, or do you? Create sanctuary, because we know that from biology, the cells needed to create sanctuary. How do you, or do you, have sanctuary in your home or around your house? So it's like taking these lessons, understanding in biology, and then also using it as reflection points. It's like, okay, how do I recognize myself? Or do I fail to recognize myself? And these are questions that we probably could get into on the private Facebook. It may not be questions we look at when we talk about the each chapter, but as I know from teaching, it takes a life of its own, and what people ask or what we learn from. So purpose, this chapter is more about, the purpose chapter is more about the genes, our genetic legacies. What problems do we get if the gene damage is not repaired? And what are the amazing ways the genes can be repaired. Key to our health and tell from ourselves is, what am I listening to? What caca in my head am I listening to? What news am I listening to? Learning to be able to make choice from a different point of view of what's healthy for my cells, what's healthy for my spirit. What am I communicating and who am I communicating to? Am I holding back? What am I connected to? Cells are always connected to other cells. They don't live by themselves. If you put a single cell in a petri dish, it's going to program itself to die. It needs connection, just like we do. And looking at how do we sustain our energy? How do we not waste our energy? What kinds of things can we look at in terms of a big, it's not a huge big chapter in the class, in the book, but it's looking at stress is the biggest waste of energy, and stress is the place where we really have some power to have some control over it. And we need not, why is energy so important in terms of the molecular story? Is everything in the body is run by energy. If we're depleted of molecular energy, which happens during stress, then nothing can repair itself. We can't make new materials for cells to build. So it really becomes, the more I teach, the more I realize this is probably key. And I do talk a little bit about Qigong, the other kind of energy, and we'll teach a practice, a Qigong practice. How do our cells learn? What supports their memory? Where do the senses play a role in our cells learning and us being able to create new habits, new behaviors? All of this has to become useful. Otherwise, it's just an intellectual exercise. And it's like, my goal has always been to make it practical. And then, of course, the final thing, maybe the first thing, is the fabric of the cell is love. And that comes from embrace. Molecules must embrace each other to be able to create new forms. And Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, was a scientist and a theologian, said if molecules hadn't been able to embrace one another, the ability to embrace and love would not have occurred higher up in us. So I like that we start with embrace and we start again with love. That's all part of the same thing. And my goal is always, I want you to fall in love. I want you to fall in love with your cells, this amazing entity that we are, trillions and trillions that are holding our spirit. And I do bring in art from within and without, if you will. This is a medicine wheel, and I wonder, some questions are, in the last chapter we talk about wisdom keepers. Is this actually a cell? Because when you get into the course, you'll see that this could very easily be the receptor sites on the cell. This could be the cytoskeleton. You can have a good imagination, or is this only a medicine wheel? And this photograph is not a mandala. It's a computer graphic of DNA looking at it from the top. So we get into, in that last chapter, we get into, where did this information come from? How did mandalas become important in terms of touching into spirit? Was it based on the ancient wisdom keepers, seers, ancestors seeing inside and seeing this and tapping into it? So the invitation is really to tune in, to be able to engage with your cell's wisdom, and you'll learn the biology of that and the practicality of it. As I mentioned, I want you to fall in love. One of the names of this book was Romancing Your Cells, but Sounds True didn't go for that. And I wanted you to just recognize it's a partnership. The cells don't operate outside of us. The cells operate in terms of what we're thinking and what our environment is and what our choice is. So it's really a divine partnership with us, our consciousness, and our choices. So we are a cellular universe. Oh, I got that word right this time. Our choices and our thoughts every moment influence our cells. And one of the mantras, there are a couple mantras in the course, cells are always in the now, which means they're always present. The only thing that takes them out of the present moment is our choices and what's going on in our mind and brain. So it's a matter of choice where we're going. And Albert Einstein, one of our geniuses, said the true sign of intelligence is not knowledge, but imagination. And where do we waste a lot of our imagination on worry? Another mantra is the brain and cells don't know the difference between what's really happening and what's imagined. So that doesn't know the difference between what's real and imagined. So we might as well imagine more positive than awfulizing. So here's a description of what we'll do in the course. These are the book chapters. The first one is Embrace, which we start next week. Recognize, Receptivity. Oh, that's one I couldn't remember. Fabric of Life, Energy, Purpose is about genes. Memory is how do we learn, how do we remember, about the senses. And the Wisdom Keeper take us out to a little more esoteric, metaphysical in the physical. And my goal in doing this course is, how do we make biology practical? How do we make science real? How do we learn to embody that wisdom? And again, I'm going to say the same thing. Experience a whole new relationship with yourself. Fall in love with your body. We don't need to go any place. Within us is a splendor of light and jewels. We can bathe in our own light, thanks to Rumi.